Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Piano Star Masterclass, professional piano lessons for everybody, brought to you by Piano League. I'm your host, Brian Lin, professional pianist and a piano teacher. Ever since I graduated from Juilliard a few years ago, making piano education accessible to everybody has been one of my main goals. And that's why I created the series, the Piano Star Masterclass. It starts with a 30-minute interview with a professional pianist, followed by an hour of live-streamed piano lessons taught by that pianist. During the live stream, you can ask us any questions in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them. You can also sign up to be a performing student, regardless of your age or level. Piano Star is all about bringing performance opportunities to piano students. So besides the masterclass, we also have the Piano Star Showcase, an hour-long virtual concert for young pianists ages 7 to 12, with cash prizes. So if your kids or students are within that age range and you want to give them a chance to perform, be sure to check that out on our website. Application deadlines are April 17th. Now, I'd like to introduce our guest teacher today. Said to become one of the truly important artists of his generation, that's how the great American pianist Emanuel Ax describes him. He's an accomplished pianist and composer from Georgia. He first completed his undergraduate studies in Budapest, Vienna, and Florence. Then he moved to New York for his master's degree at the Juilliard School. He is currently pursuing his doctorate at the City University of New York Graduate Center as a recipient of the Graduate Center Fellowship. In 2018, he won the Honens International Piano Competition, one of the most prestigious prizes in classical music. As a result, he was invited to perform at venues like Carnegie Hall, Wigmore Hall, Concerthaus Berlin, Tokyo Bunkakaikan, and 92nd Street Y. He has been featured at many leading music festivals in the United States, Germany, and Canada. He has made orchestral appearances with the London Philharmonic, Milwaukee Symphony, and Calgary Philharmonic Orchestras, among others. And last but not least, he has also recorded for the Hyperion and Steinway labels. So, everybody, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nicolas Namoradze. All right. Good morning, or I guess I should say good afternoon, Nicolas.
Yeah, where I am, it's afternoon.
Right.
Well,
So
it's great
Nicolas,
to join you, no matter the time of day.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us today. So for those of our audience that don't know, Nicolas is actually in Berlin right now. Is that correct?
Yes, I am in Berlin right now.
That is correct. All right. So our topic today, let's just jump right in. Our topic today is the secrets, the secrets to mental practicing, or why mental practice is musicians' secret superpower. So for our audiences who may not be familiar with the term, how would you define what is mental practice? Can you help us out?
Well, to be honest, mental practice is any kind of practice away from the piano. So, lots of us do score study of pieces we're playing when we're not at the piano, and even that is mental practice. So mental practice is a very, very broad term, and there are many kinds of things that count as mental practice. So I'd say pretty much any kind of practicing you're doing, any kind of thinking you're doing about a piece of music that you're playing without actually playing it, that's mental practice.
Got it. And the next question I have for you is, when or how did you first discover the power of mental practice that made you want to talk about this topic? So what made you do that?
Well, I was always interested in what the brain can do, the connection between physical actions and mental processes. And also I was interested in seeing whether, for example, I can practice something. If I was asked to jump in for a concert and I have to fly somewhere, I don't have that much time to practice. Can I use the time on the plane, on the train, and the car to practice and prepare for a concert without actually having access to a piano? And that is really what got me started, on this topic, got me started thinking about the possibilities. And then I just took it from there.
Gotcha. So when would you say, how old were you when you first discovered, or when you first started thinking, oh, this is an actual thing that I need to be actively doing? Would you say were you younger, or was it a recent thing?
I guess I was always interested in using my brain as much as I could. This is always, I was always a thinker when it came to my artistic approach. I always felt like I wanted to spend time, imagining the pieces of music away from the instrument. That came quite naturally to how I thought I should prepare for a piece of music. And, I grew up in a musical environment where listening to other pieces of music by the composers I'm playing, studying their life was a natural thing that my teachers expected I should do. So this idea that I should be doing kinds of work away from the piano was natural. But this idea of specific mental practice, I really started to appreciate when I started to notice a pattern that when I'd play pieces in concert that I had somehow imagined myself playing, or had done a little bit of work, even not formally, but just randomly, I realized I was playing somehow more confidently, better. I felt like I've been through this before compared to pieces where I hadn't done that. So I started to notice a trend, and that's when I decided, okay, I need to turn this into like a more formal, structured thing that I do regularly.
Gotcha. And just for the record, when did you first start learning piano?
Oh, I was 7 years old.
Oh, you were 7 years old.
I was
Okay.
7 years old. Yes.
Gotcha.
So.
Gotcha. All right. So naturally, my next question would be, what can you offer our audience today? What types of mental practice that you do that you think are the most effective ways to do it? How does one do it? Share the
Sure.
secrets.
Yeah, okay. So I will break this down into basically two parts. I think there are two main situations in which you can use mental practice. The first is when you're actually learning a piece of music. And the second is when you're preparing to perform, like before a concert. So I'll talk about these one at a time. When it comes to the process of preparing or learning a piece, obviously score study is a kind of mental practice. And a lot of us do this. We look at the score, we look at what the composer wrote. We take time to maybe analyze the piece if some of you are into that kind of stuff, understand the structure, whatever. But I think we can add an extra layer to this. I think the best question to ask yourself when you are, starting to form an idea of how you want to play a piece is, if I had no technical boundaries, if I could do anything, like if I were a superhuman kind of being and I could do anything in my imagination, what would be the perfect, most ideal version of this piece, in my opinion? So if I'm learning take any piece you're working on, what is like the best version of this that I can imagine in my head? Not like your favorite recording, but your own interpretation. Try to imagine it as vividly as possible. The sound, the articulation, the characters, dynamics, everything. Because the thing is, when we practice, we get used to what we play. We get used to our sound. We get used to whatever it is we're producing. And that means that we think it's okay. We think it's fine. We think it's good because we just keep hearing it. But it's a really powerful step to step back from the piano and think, if I didn't have those limitations, those physical limitations, not only that you can't play it as fast as you want or whatever, but just generally, we all have physical limitations. We're human. But if I were not human, what would be that perfect conception? And really practice trying to hear it, as clearly as possible. We're used to imagining visual things like a mountain, a sea, a lake, but practice hearing sound, tone, color as much as possible. Now, it doesn't mean that you might ever achieve that, but having that idea will mean your practice is much more efficient, much more direction-oriented, much more streamlined, and you'll work much faster. You'll have a clearer idea. I feel like if you practice without this kind of, or at least some kind of conception, you're like a person feeling their way in the dark in a cave. You're like walking forward and you're going somewhere, but you don't quite know where you're going. You don't know what your goal is. That doesn't mean that when you get a conception, it stays like that forever and you're never going to change it. No, you might change it every week, every day. But having that mental image is going to make your practice so much more efficient. And, somehow you'll feel like you have a clear idea where you're going. So developing that conception, as I said, happens in two parts. First, studying the score, really discovering how you feel you should interpret this piece, and then having that conception. The next stage, so the second part of this preparation process, is actually practicing it in your head. I'll tell you something that I think is a very powerful piece of information. This is the result of many studies on the brain. And that is, it's quite amazing that actually the brain is not able to distinguish between things you are actually doing and things you are just imagining very vividly. The brain thinks those are the same things. Like, it cannot actually tell the difference. And interestingly, one proof I have of that in my own life is that, I often imagine music in my head, music I might be playing a lot of the time. But if I imagine myself playing a piece, for example, which is quite technically challenging, when I'm not warmed up, for example, if I'm in bed, I just woke up, I am, lying around in bed and I'm imagining things. And if I start seeing that piece in my head and imagine myself playing it, I can feel that my muscles start to get sore, actually, because actually my muscles have started activating and they are like firing away with those same neural pathways as if I were really playing the piece. But because I'm not warmed up, like my muscles feel like, they're not ready for it. And I actually feel it in my body. So, when you get used to this, when you practice over and over again, your muscles will start doing whatever it is you think you've told your brain you're actually doing. So the trick here is to convince your brain that you can do things that you actually can't, or you can't yet. For example, there's, let's say, a difficult passage, a hard jump. For example, you're playing La Campanella or Brahms 2, I don't know, whatever. So instead of just practicing it over and over again for hours and hours and hours, what you can do is you can get away from the piano, get yourself in a nice, comfortable armchair, or for me, the most effective is when I'm just walking around my room. Imagine yourself playing that passage in the following ways. Imagine the sound of you like nailing it, like playing it exactly the way you want it to sound. Then imagine yourself sitting at the piano, seeing with your own two eyes your hands making these motions, like what it looks like when you play it correctly. And the third stage, and the hardest part, but maybe the most important, is start imagining what it feels like in your hands. The very interesting thing about piano playing is that if we were deaf, we could still pretty much feel whether we're playing the right notes or not. We can feel whether we're playing the right thing. We can even feel if we're playing it with, what kind of sound we're producing, because the physical response tells us a lot, which is also, it's a double-edged sword, because this means that a lot of the time we pianists stop listening to ourselves because we just can, feel that we're doing the right thing. And that's a very bad habit. So we can use that power we have already, this sensitivity of the kinesthetic response, to try to provoke ourselves to feel what it feels like when we play it correctly. Like when you play that jump and it's completely clean and you don't hit any of the wrong notes next to it, So imagine the sound, imagine what it looks like, and imagine what it feels like to play it correctly. Maybe you'll have to try it out a couple of times at the piano so you actually, first figure out what it feels like, and then you go away. And you keep repeating it in your head over and over again. So you convince your brain that you can do this and it's no problem. Like you're trying to trick yourself into thinking you can do something that you actually haven't yet practiced. And you repeat that section over and over again. Then you can go like a couple of bars before, like getting into it, so you feel confident. And then you can like actually run through like the couple of pages before that part, and then get into that difficult section and make it feel like this is no big deal. You're confident, you're calm, and it's no problem. That kind of process will really get you into a different mindset. And you might sit down at the piano and it might not be perfect yet. Though a lot of the times it's happened to me that I practice something in my head. I sit down and it's like I've been doing it for hours at the piano. And then what happens is, when you perform, when you play, you have a different strength of your mental conception and you feel like you've done this many times before. you'll feel much more confident in that moment. And, then what I suggest is a lot of the time, one part of practicing is like collecting all the different sections and passages we practiced into one smooth flow. We practice a page at a time, section at a time, but then, we play it over and over and over again to like pull it all together. This is also a really good stage to use mental practice, to practice moving from one passage to the next, one page to the next, one bar to the next. Maintaining your conception, maintaining the sound you want, maintaining your ideas, and making sure that everything you've really built actually happens when you perform. And this kind of summarizing work is something that can be achieved really well when you are away from the piano. This is kind of a really good use of this practice. Next is preparing for a performance. Now, I'll take an example. If we play in a concert hall many times, or in a room, your teacher's studio or whatever, we get used to it and we feel more comfortable there the more times we play, because we feel like, we know the space, it feels like home. It's not a new, foreign, strange environment. So what I do when I, for example, have a debut in a new place I hadn't played in before, is I'll go to Google and I'll look up images of the concert hall. Especially, I suggest looking up images taken from the stage, looking out at the audience, because that's what the concert hall is going to look like when you are standing on stage. I will try to memorize that image as vividly as I can. I will sit down at the piano, or imagine myself sitting down at the piano first. Imagine like that view, that peripheral view of the concert hall in the corner of my eye, and me in that concert hall. And I will play through my pieces, imagine myself playing it there a couple of times, so that when I actually go to that concert hall, it feels like I've done this many times before, and it's not like a new, foreign, unusual thing. I will even sometimes sit down at like my actual piano and imagine visually that hall, like in the back, like on this side of the piano, So that really helps you create the sense of familiarity. And then you do the same thing. You imagine yourself playing the piece, sounding the way you want to. You see the way you're playing, and your visual response is that of the kind of performance you want. And the kinesthetic response is also the same. The sound you want, the notes you want, whatever. And sometimes what I'll do even is I will then pretend like I travel outside of my body and I'm an audience member watching myself doing these things. And it's a good way to get out of your own head and get some perspective on what you're doing. And it can give you like a new view on your interpretation, how you sound. All these things can really help kind of create that sense of solidity. Now, the important thing to know is that it doesn't mean that as soon as something goes a little wrong, like not the way you imagined it, then it's all gone. No, actually, I mean, you can take this so far. You can imagine yourself like playing a wrong note or missing something and then getting back on track immediately. You can practice being ready for anything, especially if you're playing with other people, with an orchestra, with chamber musicians, in an ensemble. It's much more unexpected. It's much more unpredictable. You can practice seeing yourself being ready for anything. You can practice different scenarios, but even that, you can just imagine yourself being ready for anything that might happen and being able to adjust. You can even give yourself like some affirmations, like some of us have experienced meditating, or you have like daily kind of things that may, some people pray. Everyone has something that they might do, So you can tell yourself like, repeat like, if something goes wrong, I know that's not what's most important. I get back on track. What's important is to, continue expressing what I want. Repeat these kind of processes in your head so that if anything happens, you don't feel like, oh, I'm a loser. This is all going bad. I played the wrong note. Now it's, forget about it. This is terrible. No, you should really be ready for anything and have this kind of contingency planned in your head to keep perspective and make sure that you are not going to get fazed by little things going out of the way. So I'm just like brainstorming here. You can use the power of your brain really far. Like what you could even do if you really want it, like if you feel like you have pre-concert nerves and like you feel like even like an hour before the concert, you just aren't comfortable, you can even practice seeing yourself backstage in the green room, warming up, feeling confident, calm, feeling like this is no big deal. Really imagine yourself and what you're going to be like in that stage. You are preparing your brain and your own neural pathways for something that is going to feel much more natural when the thing actually happens. Use the power of vivid imagination, which we know the brain almost equates to actually doing the thing, to your advantage. It's a very, very powerful, feature of our brains that we have. We can really train our neural systems to kind of prepare ourselves for these scenarios and kind of have a game plan. And this will not only save you time practicing, but will make you feel like you've done this before, you feel much more confident, and that somehow there's a different layer of solidity beyond what can be achieved by just repeating things over and over again in the practice room. There's like a different layer of like you really knowing what's going on. I think that's the real power of mental practice.
Gotcha. Wow, that was a lot of information, and I've heard some things that I could very well use in my own performance as well.
Sure. I mean, we all have different things that we feel like we need to work on. So I've given a lot of different things. And again, people can really be flexible, try to tailor these ideas. I'm trying to give the main concepts, and everyone can use these ideas differently. That's really what's good about this kind of approach, is that we should think about what works best for us, try out different things, think about what we need the most, and use that mental power to really optimize our performance in those areas we feel needs work.
Right. So regarding the point you said about preparing yourself for a performance and really imagining yourself being in the concert hall, I was wondering, because I know a lot of pianists who have a pre-concert ritual. Sorry.
Yeah.
And sometimes they eat a banana, sometimes they wear performance clothes. Do you have one of those? Like, do you have a ritual of your own, or is that mental practice your thing? Like,
no, well, mental practice is part of it, of course, but I do have certain pre-concert processes that I feel like I want to go through. I tend not to practice too much on the day of a concert. Like, this is not the time to be cramming. You want to do your work beforehand. On the day, I'll do yoga, tai chi, some of those things to physically feel good. Qigong exercises, whatever. Everyone has their own thing, but the things that physically, like I might not lift weights on the day, that you don't want to go to the gym quite, but like some gentle kind of mobilizing exercises. And a big part of the preparation process for me, which is very much tied to mental practice, is meditation as well. I'm a big fan of meditation. I think all performing artists should have at least some experience and some understanding of how to control your breath, bring your heart rate down, get in the zone. That these breathing techniques, these kinds of, ways of focusing my mind are the ways I get in that zone, in that quiet space where you feel like the noise outside kind of goes away and you can really just think about music, you, the instrument, the audience, and that's it.
that actually, sorry. Yeah. That actually touches one of my next questions, which is, you mentioned you have to listen or imagine so many things in detail, but a lot of times when you're on a train or on a plane, there are noises around you, right? There are people around you. How do you? Well, I guess you mentioned meditation. Can you go just a little more in depth on how exactly do you meditate so that you can clear out those distractions?
Well, that's an hour-long discussion, So
right.
And I know we don't.
And we have like 5 minutes, but
yeah, I know. Yeah. But I think everyone can download Headspace or Calm or some of these meditation apps. Everyone should get a basic idea of what it is to control your breath, And I think perhaps the most important feature of meditation that applies to mental practice and developing that is awareness. Like, one of the first things you learn when you meditate is focusing on your breathing and actually feeling like your belly going in and out with your breath, like the feelings of your clothes that might be shifting a little when you breathe. Like, what do I feel in my body when I am breathing? Like, that's it. And you can use that kind of mental focus on your hands as well. Like, what am I feeling in my fingers? You can develop an extra layer of sensitivity that can really be helpful when you play and perform. So I use a bit of meditation to get myself in that zone. But meditation and mental practice are just like normal practicing. You need to practice. The mind is a muscle. So when you practice physical motions to play a piece of music, in the same way, you need to practice these things. When you meditate, you're not going to get it right the first time. The point is to learn and practice over and over again so that when you are on a plane, with a couple of breaths, you can just snap into a different zone. You won't do it the first day you can meditate. It'll take a while before you get there to make that process between starting meditation and getting in that space much faster. It will take time. Same with mental practice. The first time you sit down, you might have difficulty imagining that sound, imagining, the visual response, imagining the kinesthetic, all these things I've talked about. This takes practice as well, but it's really worth it because it's such a powerful tool to have.
Understood. So I guess my last question before we move on to the masterclass. You mentioned that, of course, we should mental practice when we're away from the piano. But let's say you have access to a piano, do you still do mental practice? And if you do, let's say for our audiences who may not practice, let's say 6-8 hours a day, can you break it down into percentages of time? How much time do you think should spend on mental practice, and how much time do you think you should spend on actual practicing? What's a right balance?
Well, I do practice, mental practice, even if I have a piano, because I can develop different skills when I practice mentally than just at the piano. Also, it means that I can practice more. I don't want to practice more than 5 hours a day or something because I don't, if I don't want to strain my hands too much or whatever, but I can still continue the process in my head, to do different kinds of work. And if I do mental practice, on my interpretation, on my conception, then when I sit down at the piano, I do more streamlined, specific things, working on certain technical elements, rather than trying to find my sound, or my interpretation at the piano. Like I save time at the piano because I've already done a lot of the work in my head. I think it was Theodore Leschetizky, one of the, really great teachers of the past century, well, even further back than that, that said, 1 hour at the piano, 1 hour away. 1 hour at, 1 hour away. So even back then, he said, spend half your time practicing at the piano, half your time practicing away from the piano. I don't think you need to do as much mental practice as you do actual practice. Like if you practice 4 hours a day at the piano, you shouldn't do 4 hours a day of mental practice. That's too much. But and it doesn't have to be so specific. You might need more at the beginning, when you're learning the piece. Then you might be more okay without. And then when you prepare for a performance, bring it back in. So find what works for you. I don't want to be prescriptive, Before a concert, if I'm not practicing that much anymore because I want to keep my, all my muscles fresh and, ready and don't want to be feeling like I'm in the middle of learning a piece of music, I might be doing almost as much mental practice as I do piano practice. Also, if I'm stuck in a hotel and I don't have access to a piano, then I'll be doing more mental practice than I am at a piano. But it really depends on how much you feel you get out of it and how much time you need to get those results. I had to do more earlier on. Now I feel like I can reach those goals much faster because I've done it so much.
Gotcha. So you've done your practice on mental practice.
Absolutely. So you have to practice mental practice to really do it well. Yeah.
Exactly. Wow. Okay. Well, with that, I think we conclude our start talk of the portion of the masterclass, and we go into our next session, which is the masterclass. And we already have our first student ready. Do you need to? You want to take a little break, or we can?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine.
All right.
Just taking a swig of water.
All right. Cool. All right. So, our first performer of the day, his name is Albert, and he will be playing the first movement of Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata. So let us just admit him, and I will open his video and audio. It will be just a second.
Sure.
Hi, Albert. You can start whenever. All right. So
great.
There's Albert, and yay! And he will start his performance whenever He's ready.
Yes.
All right, and
please
I will
just play through the whole thing, and we'll talk about it after. Yes. Bravo. Very, very well done. What an accomplished performance already. Great, great. So the connection quality is terrible. I can hardly hear what's going on, actually.
That's
Brian?
yes. I could hear that the audio was not as good. But
Yeah, it kept
that's
like fading out and like
fading. Yes,
fade.
that's the sad reality
Reality.
of
Okay.
internet lessons. But
Okay.
at least we Albert got to perform and
Yes, no, it's fantastic. No. I mean, I will try to say what I can from what I could hear. Like, so if I'm saying something that's wrong, forgive me. I just like, I can't tell exactly what's going on. So this is just like my basic idea of what's going on here. I think I have two main comments for you, Albert. This is really great. The first is that I think, what does pathétique mean? What do you think this word means to you? Well, what is Beethoven trying to say here?
Pathétique?
Yeah.
Like sad and angry, kind of.
There's an English word which is very close to this, the French word, pathos. You know this word? Pathos. This is the same word. It comes from the same word, this pathétique. So, yes, sad, angry, but primarily this is a very big drama. You have to think of it sometimes in operatic terms. Like, you've gone to the opera before? You've seen operas? Have you ever been to the opera? You should go to the opera. You have to see operas, like Mozart, Don Giovanni, like to see the drama that arises when two characters are in conflict, for example. There's tension there. So I think that there's not only a lot of pathos in this piece, but I think, especially this first movement, the drama happens from very big contrasts. Contrast between loud and soft, between fast and slow, between different kinds of characters, different kinds of articulations. And I feel like sometimes you have a desire to smoothen the differences. You make it a little bit more harmonized. The dynamics sometimes are not so extreme. Sometimes the pianos are a bit close to the fortes. I think what you might want to try to look for in your performance is to highlight those differences, those contrasts that Beethoven wrote in the music. I feel like, for example, when you start the allegro, you're already too loud and too energetic. this energy has to be contained and bubbling inside you. Don't let your left hand become too baga, 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 too soon. It should be like a distant drum roll, very, very kind of full of tension and fear. You're not exploding yet. So that when these loud moments, declamations come, then it's a very big difference. Don't give away all your drama and energy too soon. You have to make sure that you save it for those moments. Also, for example, at the beginning, when you have these kinds of things, this thing turned off. When you have, for example, these themes, just 1 second, let me, okay, the sound that you have for this and is almost the same, actually. Like, you want to make it feel like these are two different people. When you play it, it sounds like it's one person playing and singing this. But you really want to feel like this is one idea, one character. And that's something else. So that we have a big contrast between like this E flat major and the diminished seventh chord, between, one character. It might be a female character because it's further high up, and then we have, an angry man against, you want to make it feel like there's more of an argument here rather than one idea smoothly flowing into the next. Do you see what I mean? And the second important thing I think you need to watch out for is, I feel like the rests for you are empty. You play, and there's a rest, you wait, and then you play. But no, the silences are one of the most important parts of the piece. They are full, they are really dense. So please don't do this. I see you doing this. You take your hands off, then you prepare again. No, you have to keep the listener, with the tension in this. Don't relax. Don't relax. It will affect the sound of your next chord. It's not just a visual thing. And also it will affect your pulse, because sometimes your rests are impatient. You cut time, you hurry when you're not playing anything, especially at the end. You have to have an iron strict pulse in your head, for that, when you have those breaks in the end, the last time this opening theme comes, from bars 295 to 298. And wait, and wait. You were cutting them down. Don't make any physical motions, don't count along, but you should have that strict pulse in your head. And it's the way in which you can continue keeping that tension, okay? So there are two broad things that I would ask you to do. Try to make the most of these differences that Beethoven has composed, and really explore the power of the silences in this piece. It's really going to, give you another dimension to your playing, okay? So let's try to work through a couple of things, though. It's so hard for me to hear what you're doing that I really, I'm really gonna have a tough time knowing whether, what direction we're going in, but let's try, okay? So could you just start the beginning? Okay, so okay, Albert, so great. Don't forget that the little notes go to the big notes. Sometimes you do this. You accent yapam, but remember it's pa-pam, pa-pam. This should lead to this. Not, you see what I mean? Don't give the small note more weight than the long note. Okay, pa-pam, pa-pam. And also, yes, okay, so Brian has brought in the score. Oh, this is wonderful. Oh, and it's Henley as well. How professional. So, okay. And one other thing to remember is that don't be too tied to the idea that the small note is, exactly in the relationship of 3 against 1 with the big note. When we are taught in school what a dotted rhythm means, it means that instead of, as even rhythm, we have 3 plus 1. It goes pam, pam, pam. Yeah, that's what we're taught. But in this period of time, all that the dotted rhythm meant was that you have a longer note and a shorter note. You don't need to think dam, pa, pam. So sometimes you can use that to make the rhythm a bit more powerful. You can either make it a bit shorter if you want. You could go like pam, pa, pam, pa, pam, or you could actually make the small notes even longer if you want. Ti, 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 something like that. Don't get too stuck in the 3 plus 1 mentality, because that was not how performers in this period and composers in this period of time read the dotted note rhythm. It was much more flexible than what, teachers will tell us when we first learn how to read music today. Okay? But be careful about making sure that the proportions between less important rhythmic units and more important rhythmic units are kept. Don't let the small note become more loud and more accented than the notes they're leading to, okay? So, and make sure that in the rest, you keep the tension going. Don't let it relax, okay? Just give it another shot. Okay, fantastic. So I see you've taken this rhythm idea, which is great, but now your small notes have become so long that they start pushing the pulse all over the place. It drags a little bit. So split the difference, something in the middle. I would actually go for making the notes perhaps a little shorter than written, because this is almost like a French overture, pa-pam, pa-pam. So don't let it go pa-pam, pa-pam. I think it loses the tension and strength. Also, I think it's really important to fade out as much as you can here. Maybe not, to pianissimo, but you have to set up the next motion. You need to drop enough so that the motion afterwards, in bar 4 is really special. Ti, it should feel like a change in direction, something that the listener is not expecting. Don't play it as if it's business as usual. It has to be a change in direction, okay? And when you get to this is really operatic. This is like a singer with a kind of decorated passage. So don't rush through it. Give yourself time to like if you try to sing it, you'll see how hard it is to sing that high. It should feel like it requires some tension to reach those high notes. Don't just go, yeah, okay? Don't make it so easy. It has to have this sense of struggle. And then you can continue when it becomes easier when you come down, okay? But make the high notes feel like there's more tension there, okay? Now I'll stop talking and you play it once again. If you just go from the beginning, that would be great. Yeah, great. Sorry to stop you once again, but it's a little bit loud too much energy. Remember, it's forte piano. That energy should be contained. Don't express it in volume. Express it in tension, but not. And so that you really have this dynamic contrast between forte and piano. That's exactly the kind of contrast I'm talking about. Okay? I promise I won't interrupt you again. Go ahead. Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, it's so much better. You're responding very fast to these ideas I'm suggesting. So brilliant. I don't want to go through the whole thing in detail. It would be good if we could take a look at some other sections as well. Just one important thing. The piano is an unusual instrument in that once we play a note, we have very little control over what we can do with the note afterwards, right? We play it, it's out of our hands. Yes, we can change the pedaling. Of course, we will affect the release of the note, but in terms of the progress of the note, we don't have much we can do. So it's so important to listen to the decay of the note. When you play this, you have to listen very carefully to the dynamic level so you can play the next note, as a continuation of it, after the decay in dynamic level of the accented note, okay? Because remember, in this time period, when you have a two-note phrase, it means that the first note is louder than the second note, okay? So when you see this, don't play the second note as loud as the first note. It has to be quieter. Always. In this time period, a two-note phrase means a decrescendo. This mark, the phrase mark, the slur, also means that you have to taper out. Now, if you have a long phrase mark, don't just decrescendo all the time because you'll lose a sense of direction. But with these two-note phrases, you have to have this relationship, pa-pam, ti-ti-ram, not ti-pam, okay? Avoid that. Make sure it's ti. I'm just exaggerating now, but something like that, okay? You don't need to go back and do it again. Just keep that in mind for next time. And also, look at how Beethoven marks the last bar of the opening grave before the allegro. He first marks a sextuplet and then a septuplet and then speeds up. So don't just start the chromatic scale, at the fast tempo. You have to speed up a little bit. You have to start out a little bit slower, and then speed up. But also, feel like you're on a slide, you've been on a slide before, right? At the top of the slide, you go slower and then you speed up. So it's the same kind of thing here. Don't just start, at full speed. You need to move into it a little bit, because it's strange for the listener to feel that, and then all of a sudden, we run. We need to, and then so forth. Okay, so give yourself that moment of transformation. It will make it feel smoother and more organic, and not like, just like a strange cut. Okay, so but that's enough about the opening. We have like 3 minutes left, so let's just try to work a little bit on the allegro. I don't want to talk too much. Let's just keep moving. Okay, so can you just start the allegro or just the bar before? Okay, great. So very quickly, I think you need to try to practice this, getting it down to a dynamic level as quiet as possible. You don't need to play it as quietly as possible, but we're playing something that is fast, but we have to get used to actually playing the notes very slowly. The notes happen in quick succession, but in order to make it quiet, the actual playing of the note should not be fast. Otherwise, it's going to be loud. We need to get used to, practicing with very close contact with the keyboard to make it really like a drum roll and not like a taka 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 taka, because that's not what we want here. Because there tends to be too much noise at the beginning. It should be really, and then when the crescendo happens, then it will really happen. It's just a little too loud. Also, when you see a sforzato, it's a sforzato in that dynamic marking. So a sforzato in piano is going to be quieter than a sforzato in forte. Okay? So when you see this, don't make it so loud. Make it more like pa, pa, like very concentrated. Like try to voice it towards your fifth finger, not your thumb. So it's got that sharpness, rather than it sounding flat. You want that kind of edge, which will help you get that kind of cutting sound, right? Okay, so make sure that you keep things in proportion. If I have an accent in piano, it's going to be very different than if I have that same accent in forte. Okay, so make sure you're careful about these sudden exclamations. They are in a certain context. Okay, now let's keep moving. You can take care of that alone. Let's just play a little more and then we'll have to wrap up. Okay, so can you just do from like I don't know, like this last section going into the next page. Good. Okay, great. So I'll say my last thing about this section now. What do you imagine? What kind of ensemble do you imagine here? When we play piano, we should often have examples of orchestras, ensembles. What do you imagine? Another instrument, another bunch of instruments playing this section? Okay. I would let you think, but we have so little time that I'll tell you what I think. I think this is really like a string quartet. You have that's our cello, that's our first violin, that's our viola, and that's our second violin. Okay? So it's really like a string quartet. They are not all playing the same dynamic level. I think you need to organize your dynamic levels a bit more. For example, I don't think should be so loud. I think should obviously be the loudest. Then you have this, it's almost, like the viola is imitating a horn, and then should be the, least present, because now I'm here, ta 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 ta, too loud, and it blocks everything else. It makes the sound a bit chaotic. So anytime you're playing, you should think, okay, in this texture, what's the most important thing that I need to bring out? What's the next most important thing, and so forth. You have to create layers. You can't let all the notes sound the same dynamic level. If you're playing a certain texture, they should always be in different layers. Something is closer to the front, something is further away, okay? And that will help give your playing an extra dimension, so that the listener knows exactly what is really important, what's the main theme, the bass line, the harmony, and we don't, confuse all of these. Okay, you'll have these clearer textures if you do so. But otherwise, you're doing a fantastic job. I hope that you continue enjoying playing and working on this piece, and it was really great for you to join us. Thank you so much. Very, very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful performance. All right. So I think our next performer is still adjusting his audio setting. So I saw a question coming from the audience, actually.
Yes.
So why don't we talk a little bit about
Sure.
that? So an audience asked, do you look at the music when you mental practice, and does mental practice also make you tired? How would you answer to that?
Well, obviously, I look at the music when I do score study. But when I'm doing mental practice, I don't actually look at the music. I actually close my eyes a lot of the times to help that sense of focus. And yes, mental practice can be tiring because it's like a lot of effort. You feel like your brain is on fire. It's a lot of energy. Even if you're just sitting in a chair, it's a lot of concentration. So just like with practice, you don't want to be sitting at the piano for 2 hours straight. You want to get up after like 50 minutes, an hour, move around, relax, drink some water, check social media if you want, whatever, So same with mental practice. Don't push yourself to try to do too much in one go, because that can be hard. So pace yourself. Try just being focused for 10 minutes at a time first, then 20 minutes, then 30 minutes. Like with any new skill, you'll take time to adjust to it and take it in bite-sized portions. Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. It looks like our next performer is ready in the waiting room.
Okay, great.
So let's admit him and get him set up. Here we go. Hello, Bai Shui.
Hi.
How's it going?
Great.
All right. Can you see us?
Yeah.
Great. All right. Nicolas, why don't you take it over?
Oh, yes, sure. So please just, run through the movement, and then we'll just talk about it after.
Okay.
Bravo. Okay, great job. Okay, again, I'm having a lot of trouble hearing what's going on. I have a feeling that there's overload protection on all of these microphones. Whenever you play really loudly, then kind of it compensates and gets rid of the sound. But I think I have an idea what's going on. So I'll do my best to address what I think we might want to work on. But again, my idea of what you're playing is very fuzzy. So forgive any judgments in error. Really great. I really like your energy and momentum. You're going at it with a lot of kind of passion. I think that no matter how much energy or passion or momentum we might have when we play, we always have to have somewhere in the back of our head a cold, calculating part. You know, even if we're super into it, something that keeps things in control. I feel that sometimes, you know, you so get into it that the notes start flying, you know, and the really important thing in this piece is to have an ironclad sense of pulse, you know, so that and that you have this hyper articulation in all of the 16th notes, you know, don't let them just fall and tumble. You have to keep this tension inside. Don't be like, like a horse that escaped from the stable and is just galloping around town being chased by the police. You need to have this sense of tension throughout. Don't let your fingers just run off. Okay, so it's really important to keep things as tight as possible in terms of pulse. And one of the important things in this regard is I have a feeling that sometimes you're playing a passage and you start thinking about the next passage. So you kind of like wrap up the have we lost Bai Shui?
Yeah, I think he disconnected for some reason.
Oh, I see.
We'll try to get him. I'll turn on my video, and I guess we'll chat a little bit. I think he was already having trouble with internet.
I know that his picture froze for a while, so I thought I was talking to a statue for a while. I
Right.
thought, like, what's going on?
Right, but you can still, comment on his performance to our audience who are watching.
Yes, sure. I mean, it happens with a lot of us that, when we get really excited, then, things start accelerating, but it's important to keep that energy. And one thing that I felt in the performance was that, you're playing one passage, and then, of course, you have to think about the next thing that's going to happen. But if you do that, what's important is not to forget what you're currently playing. Because what would happen sometimes is, you're playing, you think about the next thing, and then you kind of wrap up whatever you're doing without much thought because your mind is already in the next bar or two bars. So You shouldn't let that happen. You should make sure that you can finish properly the phrase, the idea, and practice simply moving from one idea to the next, which you have to do in Beethoven so often, as quickly as possible. But don't just be playing and then you move to the next thing and you kind of rush the ending of the previous phrase. That's a bad habit, and something that you really need to be conscious about when you're practicing.
Right. So how does one when one is playing something and you have to hear and listen to what you're doing at the present moment, and you also have to predict and think about the future. How does one balance the two and really find time to do both?
Well, I think that playing the piano especially, because you have so many things to think about, is like the ultimate multitasking.
Right.
You have to listen, you have to play first of all, you have to then listen to what you're playing, adjust your playing depending on your oral feedback, and you have to think about what you're playing, you have to think about what you're doing next. Obviously, thankfully, we have practicing in order to make many physical things automatic. We don't need to think about every note we're playing when we perform because we've practiced this many times. These motions are automatic. So, I'm going to say what I've been talking about all day. Today's mental practice will, of course, help you in these kinds of things, getting used to thinking about one thing and moving to the next passage with the next idea in mind without causing any problems in what you're actually doing at the moment, without sacrificing the integrity of the phrase you're finishing because you're trying to think about the next thing. And you really have to get used to having many things in your mind at the same time. You're thinking about what's coming next, but you are still focusing on the sound you're producing in the moment. You have to be able to balance this. And if you're having trouble doing that at the piano, then stepping away from the piano and imagining this process in your head will help you get a new perspective on how you might be able to achieve this.
Gotcha. That's very, very helpful. That's something that I try to tell my students too, that always have a game plan of the overall structure, not just whatever you're working, whatever you're playing at the moment.
And, I find that we always have more time than we think we do when we play. When we're playing, we think, oh, this next thing, oh, this next thing, oh, this next thing. But actually, we have way more time than we think, because when we play, time actually slows down. We speed up. So when we think time is moving normally, we're moving actually faster than we should be. I find that, like in a performance of mine, if I take more time than I think I should be taking, when I listen back, I say, oh, that was just right.
Right.
And especially when you're playing not only with an ensemble, but especially with an orchestra, which is always behind and always slower. And, you just need to breathe and open up and think of time in a really different way, because when we have the adrenaline rush, you're excited, you're in a different state of mind, we just work much faster than we do otherwise, So we have to get used to compensating for this. It's really important. So that's something I'd always tell, someone I happen to be, coaching or guiding. You have much more time than you think you do.
Right, and I find that myself too. When I ask my students to exaggerate something, let's say you take more time there, exaggerate it, and usually the exaggerated version is the correct version sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that our own feedback regarding what we're playing when we're on stage is very unreliable a lot of the time, because we can be in a very specific state of mind. And I find it's often influenced by how prepared I am and how well I know the piece as well. If I know it super well, I usually think I'm playing worse than I actually am because I expect so much of myself. So your perception on how you're playing is so subjective, changes in the moment depending on how you slept that day, how prepared. Yeah, so many things affected. So even if we think things aren't going well, we should never listen to that inner monologue ever, because it's so unreliable.
Right.
And secondly, yeah, our perception of time is so distorted when we're excited that that's something we should always keep in mind. And that's also something you can bring into your mental practice. Imagine yourself playing, feeling like you have all the time in the world, feeling like you're not following any kind of sense of I'm on a train that's not stopping, but you feel like I can take time, no one's going anywhere. I can just play with, not only at the piano, but I can play with time,
Right.
in a much more comfortable way.
Just to relate to our topic, what kind of mental practice do you think Bai Shui could have benefited from for improving his Appassionata practice? What kind of he's here. I think he's
Okay.
connected with his phone this time, and I guess you can
I
tell
see.
him that to him.
Okay.
All right.
Well, okay. I don't know
Yeah.
if Bai Shui could hear our conversation.
Okay.
But
I just admitted him.
okay, great.
Inside.
So,
Yes. But yeah, I would be curious myself. What specific steps he should take. Hi,
well,
you're
hi,
back.
Bai Shui. Yeah.
Right.
So
So
yeah,
Baishui, yeah, we were Nicolas is going to talk about his suggestions on how you could mentally practice your Beethoven, your Appassionata. Can you hear us, Baishui?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so because we were talking about mental practice earlier, and Brian said, okay, so in this situation, how would mental practice help? And I think imagining yourself playing the piece and keeping a very strict pulse, like hearing almost like a metronome in your head, would really help you find that sense of space and not let yourself like get lost in the 16th notes. Like to keep the bigger picture of the pulse that's following you throughout the piece. It's really important in this piece, in the first movement as well, and in the last movement, to keep that structural framework. I'm not saying you should play metronomically, but I do think that, if you have like a 16th note passage that's a little bit easier, you start playing faster. When it gets a little hard, you slow down. You don't want that to happen. You want the pulse to stay strict and that the notes fit inside that kind of frame, okay? It's really important. One thing I was telling Brian when we were discussing your performance is when you're finishing a phrase, don't start thinking about the next phrase in a way that prevents you from finishing what you're actually playing properly. Sometimes I feel like you're playing something, you start thinking about the next thing, and you just rush the end of the phrase, because your mind is already in the next bar or next page. Don't let yourself do that. Make sure that you are able to focus enough on what you're actually doing so that it doesn't like get forgotten about, okay?
Yeah.
It's
I think
hard.
It's one of the hardest problem I need to handle, I think.
Yeah, I know. Well, look, it's something we need to practice, and maybe stepping away from the piano sometimes will help you like feel like, okay, I'm thinking about this phrase. I know the next thing is coming, but I'm gonna finish this, and I have plenty of time to move to the next thing. Like I know, like this part, and then you need to jump. You think like, oh, I have so little time, I have to rush, blah, blah, blah. But you have way more time than you think. Like when you play, you're excited and you think that you need to hurry, but you don't. Like, you have much more time than you think. Take your time. No one is like gonna come after you if you take a little bit more time. It's better to take more time a little bit than to rush too much. Okay.
Okay.
So I also think that sometimes you need to follow through with the notes a little more, believe in them until the end, not just when you play them. But generally, I don't understand why you are playing this so short. Why are you playing it so short, actually? There's no staccato, it's a quarter note. Why, it's it sounds like a hiccup, but it sounds too funny. This it could be like, in a different Beethoven sonata, maybe that's, has more humor, but this is not funny. This is deadly serious. This is like you're fighting for your life. So it's really important to keep that tension, and imagine that the note is actually crescendoing into the end, so that the silence is actually even louder. It's not like but you keep that tension through the end of the note. Okay, and not just to these, but to many other kinds of expressions in this piece as well. I just use this as an example. Could you just start from the top, and we can work through a couple of specific spots. We don't have much time left, but let's try. Okay.
You mean the?
Or if you just go from the beginning, that's fine. Okay. So why is this so short? Beethoven actually marks a pedal through the beat. Actually, if you look at the score, why are you like just cutting it off so fast? You're already moving to the next thing. You should commit to that note until the end. And also don't hiccup. It's not drunk. It's agitated. It's tense. Those notes have to have this inner life. Don't just cut them off. Okay. Go ahead. Okay, so better, but one thing that will really help you is, this is a very bad, pianist habit. The pedal can extend the length of our notes. So what we do is we play and we take our hands off. Keep your hands on the notes until the end of the note. Use the pedal for the sound, but not to determine the end of the note. So, sorry. That will help you decide more clearly what your interpretation is, rather than just and letting your foot do the work. No, do it with your hands. The pedal is not there to change the length of the note. It's there for the sound. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. One last time, and I won't stop you this time. Okay, I can't go into much detail. We just don't have much time. You still do that a couple of times, but it's getting better. Okay, make sure you so that then the break, the rest is more breathless. There's kind of this tension, this sense of unease that you have to create. Okay, when you have these notes, You're playing them very easily, but papam, papam, it has to fit in with this tatim rhythm, okay? Don't make it, they're not grace notes, the little notes. Tatam, tatam, like the same, it's the same, the thing. Papi, papi, not easy. Nothing should be easy in this piece. Everything has to be fought for. And, you know, I'd ask you generally, when you practice this later, for your 16th notes, when they're piano, to be both quieter, but at the same time more intense. Now they sound kind of mezzo forte and quite easy. What I want is hyper articulated. Maybe you need to do it a little more non-legato because they blend into each other too much, you know. And especially in these kinds of things, you want to practice so you get the kind of, you know, so that they don't, you know, you don't want that, you know, okay? You know, you want to have that intensity in each note so that, but they shouldn't sound, you know, at the same dynamic level. Don't iron out the differences. There are little motions always in every 16th note. It's not, okay? Like this inner life is so necessary in all these little figurations in this piece. Okay, that's where you're gonna get the tension, not by playing it fast or loud, but by that inner energy in between the notes. Okay, so again, we don't have much time to go into details there. So if you can just start from like and like keep going. So like around bar 40 or 45, something like that. This area. If you can go from there, that would be great. Okay, so first of all, when you go tatim, you need the listener needs a moment to feel that we ended the phrase. So don't feel like you have to go ta 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 and just rush into the next thing. Finish it. Okay, like give yourself like split second there. You just need it to make clear the structure. This next part, I feel like it drags a little bit, maybe because the left hand is a bit difficult. Like it slows down a little. What is the left hand essentially? What is it doing here? Is it melodic?
No.
No, what is it doing? What's the function?
It's like make a harmony of the.
Oh, exactly, it's a harmony. Okay, so I don't need to hear all the notes so that make it a kind of tremolo. You know, it's not that important. It's not as important as your right hand, which has the melodic material. I think it will help you keep the pulse if you don't try to play all the notes so present. Make it more light, a bit more in the background, you know, and that will make it easier. But this motion, like your two outer fingers versus the inner fingers, should feel very natural. It's like grabbing something. You can just practice paka, 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 paka. So you shouldn't feel like you're activating different fingers. It's like a hand motion. So don't try to like isolate your fingers, because then it's gonna be hard. It should just feel like grabbing something. Paka, 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 paka. Yeah, and dry and light and not so. Otherwise, it's too present. and it obscures the rest of the texture. It feels like I hear the orchestra more than I hear the soloist, you know? So you don't want, yes, so don't change the proportions there. And I think that will help you keep the speed as well. We've already reached the end of the slot, but just keep playing a little more because we had a connection problem just to get at least to the end of the section. Could you go from there? Better. Okay. So the last things I'll say, it's really important that you follow the dynamic markings here. Do not crescendo, and then you have to fade out. So that, then that sforzando, really comes because you're kind of flattening out the dynamics here. Everything is kind of loudish, but we don't have those moments, which is really important. And you're doing the same thing here. And then you just jump into the next thing, bam, give yourself time. Don't be rushing into the next thing. Don't be impatient. You have more time than you think. Okay? Can you just try this stretch once again? Maybe from that section. Okay, I think that's a good place to come to a halt. I think I'll get in trouble if we keep going, but great job. You're already, I think it's improving a lot already, and I think you know in which direction to take this piece. Remember, the integrity of the pulse is important. Try to develop the intensity in this 16th note passage work. Really find why Beethoven wrote it the way he did. Bring out these shapes. Don't let it just become like filler 16th notes, and make sure you know what's important, what isn't important, and give everything the time it needs for the listener to really understand the musical material. Okay? But great job, and I wish you all the best with this piece. Wonderful.
Great job. Great performance, Bai Shui. We'll see you next time. Let's see. All right, and I just want to apologize to you and to our audience for that internet breakup.
What can we do? Yeah,
but I think in a way it kind of symbolizes the spirit of this series, which is we provide this platform for literally everyone. These are piano lovers out there who may not otherwise have the opportunity to have access to really great artists. Really, I mean it. Great artists like you.
Well, no, thank you.
And
it's a pleasure. It really is.
Yeah. So in a way, we have to anticipate these internet problems. But I just want to say thank you so much, Nicolas, for being here, for spending time with these people and with me.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun. It was fun to chat and share thoughts with these wonderful young pianists. And,
right. And if you, the audience, want to learn more about Nicolas, you can go to his website, nicolasnamoradze.com, to follow his performances and just really be a fan of his, like I am. And
thank you.
If you want to sign up to be a performing student in the next Piano Star Masterclass, you can go to our website at www.thepianoleague.com. If you want to watch, if you want to watch our next episodes, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And with that, that's the end of our Piano Star Masterclass. And thank you, everyone. Happy practicing, everyone. And we will see you guys next time.